Last month, in a show of transparency with the American people, House Speaker Mike Johnson released 90 hours of security footage taken throughout the January 6th event at the Capitol. But this represents a mere fraction of the more than 40,000 hours of footage that Speaker Johnson announced he would release. It's going to be released in bits and pieces over the next few months. Well, earlier today, he told reporters that additional personnel have been hired to go through the footage, working on blurring out faces so individuals aren't retaliated against or targeted by the DOJ. When the full video is available, what will Americans learn by Speaker Johnson's efforts at government transparency? What have partisans been hiding? And what will the full footage tell us about the January 6th committee's selective use of the footage to paint a particular narrative about the incident for which more than 1,000 Americans face federal charges? Joining me now to discuss this, Congressman Andy Biggs. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight and Accountability Committee. He represents the 5th Congressional District of Arizona. Congressman Biggs, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be with you.
You've been tracking this for a while. I mean, you've been on this. You've been tracking this. What do we know? What is this? What do we know thus far from the footage that's been released?
Well, what most people have seen that they didn't get to see is the almost cooperative nature sometimes between Capitol Police and the people coming in. You saw many people with order and decorum walking through the building. Many of them staying within actually the red velvet ropes in both the rotunda and the statuary hall. You saw just generically big crowds, people coming in. And that's kind of what you've seen in the 90 hours or so that have been released. You haven't seen people with weapons. You haven't seen people with guns or knives. What you've seen are people with flags, signs, posters walking through, and that's what this video that's been released reveals. Now, I've actually had a chance I've watched many additional hours of video long before this was ever released.
Well, let me ask you about that, Congressman Biggs. Is it your impression, based upon what you've seen, both what's been released publicly, what will be released publicly, according to the commitment of Speaker Johnson, that the January 6th committee intentionally presented a selectively edited, misleading account to the public?
Yes, Tony, very much so. I have seen the areas where there was violence, and there were really two areas where that was taking place. And so I've seen that. And those people, they had a problem, and many of them have been prosecuted. But by and large, the vast majority are wandering through the Capitol and are peaceful. It is, as our Democrat friends would always say, a mostly peaceful demonstration. But we know the J6 committee cherry-picked it, so they would always show the violent rough edges of the event that took place that day. So that's one thing. Then you know that they had this malevolent intention, because we have learned just this past week as well that they allowed Cassidy Hutchins basically to rework her whole testimony from what it originally was. And then the third thing is, Benny Thompson, who is the chairman of the J6 committee, he basically threw out videos of depositions. So we don't have those. We can't get a hold of those. So you don't really know how much tinkering was going on, but certainly you have a good reason to suspect there was substantial amounts of tinkering going on by the J6 committee in and of itself.
Now, I've talked to several individuals more involved in this than I have been. I've watched it from a distance, but some say that this footage could provide evidence that there were federal agents that were kind of seeding the crowd to at least the portions that were violating the law to move into the Capitol. Have you seen any evidence of that?
What I have seen is you'll see occasionally in the violent areas, you'll see one or two people that were kind of instigators. They were trying to throw gas on the fire and causing a great deal of havoc. But don't forget, Tony, that the former Capitol Police Chief himself said there were lots and lots, I think is the term he used, of federal agents amongst the and also some local Leos were in amongst the crowds that day, lots of them. And he said far more than they've admitted or will admit to. And, you know, we've had Director Wray, director of the FBI, and he won't acknowledge that there were federal agents in the crowd, and nor would he tell us how many federal agents were in the crowd.
Do you think, Congressman Biggs, that this narrative that was created by January 6th committee, focusing on those, as you pointed out, those two areas where there was violence, of which we've spoken out, we shouldn't be having that kind of stuff. It's wrong to do that. But has that narrative that was created been used to provide cover for those that have, I mean, we've imprisoned, we've charged 1,000 Americans. I mean, when you juxtapose that to what happened in the summer of 2020 when we burnt down, we saw cities all across America burned down and nothing happened.
Yeah, it's to me, they crafted a narrative. They worked with the media. They worked with the weaponized federal police apparatus and surveillance apparatus. And they actually did an amazing job stigmatizing it, calling it an insurrection. It was not an insurrection. It was a mostly peaceful protest with a few rioters that got out of hand.
Yeah, insurrection. There's an insurrection where you have weapons, you try to take over a government.
Yeah, an insurrection means you're trying to execute a coup d'etat.
Right.
And you can't execute a coup d'etat with Trump and MAGA signs and flags. I mean, that just doesn't happen. Was there some violence that went on? Yeah, of course there was, and it should never have happened. But the bottom line is, these people didn't come in prepared to try to execute a coup d'etat. Right. It just didn't happen. And to call it an insurrection and then work with the media and then with the corrupt J6 committee, it was disgusting to see happen. But you now have people, and the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia says he wants to get another 1,000 or 1,200 people and to go after them as well. And these are people that their lives are ruined and shattered now because they've been prosecuted. And some were just absolutely in the wrong place at the wrong time. They committed a trespassing offense, and they should have been treated as someone who trespassed, right. Which in most places is a small fine and maybe an unsupervised period of probation for 3 months or something like that. It's not putting them in prison or in jail like these overzealous, ridiculous partisan prosecutors have done.
I want to turn now to something else you're working on. But today, Christopher Wray, FBI director, was in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he called for the reauthorization of the government's surveillance tools that they've been using, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Why would we give them a reauthorization? And I understand, I've seen the unclassified briefings of how they use this to go after foreign threats. But how can we trust this FBI and this Department of Justice based on what we were just talking about? And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's hard to reward the federal police and surveillance apparatus by continuing this. The reason that you have to, in my opinion, you have to do something with 702 is because former leaders have told us, and I'm talking about of the police apparatus, have said, well, we feel constrained by 702. If 702 is gone, we will have no constraints at all, which is kind of even scarier, Tony, when you think about that. So what we've said is if you're going to start looking at U.S. persons' communications data, you need to have a warrant. And we think that's rational and reasonable. And if you violate it, we think that there should be punishments, the criminal penalties and civil sanctions. And we also say that there should be a more zealous independent advocate that we call an amicus to make sure that these things go, and that the Congress, the oversight, we have constitutional oversight over these programs. We should be allowed to come in. You already have the judicial branch and you have the executive branch. Let's have the legislative branch to be able to come in and to any FISA court proceeding and see what goes on to make sure that Americans' rights are being protected.
Well, isn't that the role of Congress, to provide oversight to the executive branch and the judicial? I mean, isn't that a part of the checks and balances? Absolutely.
And so my bill does that. It does all the things that I'm telling you, and even more. The idea is to basically put the handcuffs on the federal government so they don't abuse the rights of American citizens, yet recognizing that they need to surveil these foreign threats and these foreign individuals. But what they're going to tell you is they're trying to scare people out.
Right.
Whether they're members of Congress or the public, to say, "Oh no, we're going to miss these terrorist things." But
I worked in anti-terrorism before. When I came out of the Marine Corps, I was in law enforcement, and so I don't take this lightly. And what I'm about to say, I don't say lightly. But I've come to a point where I have greater fear of my own government than I do of a terrorist threat externally.
Yeah, and it's justified. I mean, it's everything from what's going on the border today to the infiltration and maybe even provocation of the J6 folks. It is countless surveillance operations of American citizens without warrants that are in violation of the own standards that were set by the FBI, the NSA, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I mean, all these things going on indicates pretty clearly that you have to have a check and a watchdog over the federal government today.
With what has been uncovered since 2016 and how a lot of this was used against President Trump, and how it's just like almost every month we're finding out something new. I mean, we were just talking earlier with Senator Hawley about the uncovering of more of how the Catholic Church was being targeted by the FBI. So, Congressman, before we run out of time, your bill, what is the name of it, the status? Are we going to see this move to the House floor?
I hope so. The bill is going to be heard in Judiciary Committee this week, and we're going to pass. I believe we'll pass it out. It will be a bipartisan bill. It has support bicamerally, so we have senators that support this on both from, whether it's Senator Wyden or Senator Lee and others on both sides of the aisle. And it is. I knew you were going to ask me this. We don't really have a clever name for this. But it is to protect liberty and individual rights.
Yeah, it's a Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act. It's kind of a long title. What can people do to be helpful here?
They should let their members of Congress and their U.S. senators know that they support this bill. There will be a competing bill by the intelligence community to do very little, and to expand in some areas powers that have already expired. So we really do need the public to support that, and by doing that. But I would tell you that it's important to also let Speaker Johnson, Mike Johnson, know that you support this bill, because this bill is going to actually preserve and protect our rights, and actually constrain the federal government.
All right, we're going to put this on the website, and then as you have the hearing next week, we'll follow back up with you. Congressman Andy Biggs, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate it very much.